Wang Wei, Ballad of an Old General. When he was only 15 or 20, he captured a Tartar cavalry horse to ride. On South Mountain, he killed a tiger with a white forehead. In battle, he was the equal of yellow-bearded Cao Zhang. He fought single-handed across 3,000 miles. With his one sword, he was a match for 1,000,000 of the enemy. His army struck quickly like a thunderclap. The barbarian horsemen scattered before his chariot spikes. Wei Qing never lost. Heaven brought him fortune. Li Guang ended as a failure when his luck ran out. Since he was dismissed, age has found him, bitter and disappointed as his hair turns white. In his prime, he could hit a bird in flight. Now his elbow withered, he cannot draw a bow. He lives like Xiaoping, selling melons along the road, or like Tao Yuanming, planting willows by his gate. Along his quiet lane are only failing trees. From his window, a few cold, empty hills. He swears he would be another Gengong who found water at Shule, not like Guangfu, his career ruined by drink at Yingchuan. Armies are gathering beneath the mountains of Helan. Couriers with urgent orders ride day and night. In the heartland, all the young men are drafted. The emperor sends out armies in 5 directions. The old general brushes his armor, it shines like snow. He raises his sword, the engraved stars flashing. With a bow from Jan, he could kill their generals. He feels shame that the enemy has crossed our borders. Don't ridicule this old governor of Yunzhong. He has courage enough for one more battle. So we continue with the ballads of Wang Wei. I think, as we mentioned in the previous one, in the Ballad of a Luoyang Girl, the scholarly consensus is that Wang Wei wrote these ballads very early in his life. In fact, probably the one we read yesterday when he was still in his teens. You could say that ballads were the training ground in which Wang Wei and probably other poets of the Tang Dynasty trained themselves before starting to tackle the much more formally demanding and complex regulated poetry of their times. Ballads would have been particularly good to work with for the reason I have just mentioned. Their metrical and tonal requirements were much, much simpler, so they were easier to make. But on the other hand, the fact that their topics were pretty rigidly set also facilitated perhaps the poetic work, because you just, like in this case, you took a poem, an old ballad that was about an old general lamenting his age and not being able to serve. You've got the plot cut out for you. You just have to fill it in with anecdotes and stories. This poem clearly seems to me to show that it's a juvenilia, a young poet's effort at taking a conventional topic and making a dazzling piece. It's quite chock full of allusions, of quotations to old generals of the past, especially of the Han Dynasty, which, as we've mentioned before, was the first great classical age of China and lasted. It had 2 periods, the Western Han and the Eastern Han, but it lasted approximately from 200 BC to 200 AD. So its end was at least 500 years before the time of Wang Wei, half a millennium. So let's the main topic of the poem, as I've just stated, is commemorating, depicting an old general, and an old general who was a very successful general, but now he's an old man. Age passes for everybody, and now he has been out of service for quite some years, and he would really desire to be able to serve the nation again in its time of need. As opposed to some of the ballads and poems we've encountered with martial topics, which, as we've commented before, tend to be generally quite pessimistic and dark. They tend to picture war in a very realistic way and from below, from the suffering, the hardships, the deaths of the soldiers. This one is quite close to the conventional epic poetry that we tend to find more in other traditions, not in the Chinese. It's, pretty exaltative of the great warrior and great general. So its main topic is, a great general, a great fighter, a great warrior, his feats in the past and his still burning passion in spite of his years to serve the country through his military prowess. Of course, implicit and connected with the topic, because it's an old general's ballad, is the passage of time, old age as the destroyer of strength, all the more so in the case of a man in a profession like the military, which demands physical fitness, or at least in fighting roles, perhaps not its strategy and in command. Anyway, let's take a look at the poem bit by bit. It's pretty straightforward, but the fact that it has so many allusions to historical generals would probably make it a little bit difficult for reading if you are unacquainted with those references. So the poem has three parts that correspond to the three stanzas. The first stanza depicts, you could say, the golden age of the general when he was young and when he was a successful military leader. The second stanza makes a contrast with this golden age of the past. It depicts a present in which the general is now a retired old man, living a pretty humble life and unhappy at being out of office and at being old. The last stanza seems to present a possibility of hope and change. There is a new renowned war with the barbarians, and the general hopes, intensely desires to be employed in it. Whether this is just an old man's raving, lunatic fantasies, or there is a real possibility, I think is left pretty ambiguous in the poem itself. I think the tone is that really the general's fantasies of serving again are not realistic. He won't be employed, but if he physically probably wouldn't be able to fight against the barbarians, he definitely has more than enough courage, bravery, and spirit to try to do it. So let's follow the poem couplet by couplet as usual. When he was only 15 or 20, he captured a Tartar cavalry horse to ride. On South Mountain, he killed a tiger with a white forehead. In battle, he was the equal of yellow-bearded Zhao Zhang. So the poem starts with youth. The general is presented as a youthful warrior, and quite a good one at that. Two pieces of particular prowess are mentioned in the first two couplets. First of all, he was able to capture an enemy horse and ride it, so a horse of the steppes that was ridden by professional steppe fighters who were masters of riding on horseback. Second, he has killed a big tiger, and the third one, it's more implicit, but it says, in battle, he is the equal of Zhao Zhang. Zhao Zhang was the son of General Cao Cao, who we've encountered already in this collection. He was one of the great generals at the time of the fall of the Han, and he founded one of the three kingdoms that came after the collapse of the Han dynasty. And one of his descendants was an important painter, which Du Fu praised in a couple of poems that we've also read in this anthology. Zhao Zhang was a son of Cao Cao, and he was an outstanding general, a very poor scholar. He did very poorly at the university, but he was a very, very good military man and almost single-handedly quelled a barbarian revolt in the north with very few troops. So the first of the exemplar of martial prowess, which serve as a model or as a pattern for this old general in the ballad. Let's continue with the deeds of the old general. He fought single-handed across 3,000 miles. With his one sword, he was a match for 1,000,000 of the enemy. So, okay, this is quite hyperbolic, but, as a soldier, as a fighter, he was outstanding. Yeah, and he fought far and wide. His army struck quickly, like a thunderclap. The barbarian horsemen scattered before his chariot spikes. So now his ability as commander of the army is praised, no longer as just a fighter, as a commander, as the leader of an army. He attacks quickly and he scatters the barbarians easily. And the first stanza finishes with a couplet, a bit philosophical, reflecting on the difficulties or the dangers of success for a general, however brave and valiant and able he might be. There's always a big component of chance. Wei Qing never lost. Heaven brought him fortune. Li Guang ended as a failure when his luck ran out. Now, Wei Qing and Li Guan are two important generals from the Han Dynasty, from the Western Han Dynasty. They served under Emperor Han Wudi in the middle years of the 2nd century of our era. Oh, yeah, approximately. Yeah, from the middle era, from the 150s to the 100s or 90s BC. Emperor Han Wudi had a very long reign. He launched many military campaigns against the Xiongnu, against the barbarians, and he was pretty successful at an outrageous human cost. But he managed to expand the borders of China permanently, almost duplicating the territory of the empire. We're not going to talk about Han Wudi. In a way, he is the greatest and at the same time the worst emperor of Chinese history, very similar to the first emperor. But while the first emperor was reviled in Chinese historiography as a tyrant, Han Wudi has a more mixed reputation. Like some of his policies were very successful, but they had a tremendous human cost. He was the emperor that canonized Confucianism at the state level, but at the same time, in practice, he was a ruthless legalist with harsh laws and punishments. And this was very, very typical, especially in the army. So the army under Han Wudi was a fast way of promotion. It was one of the few social ladders through which a commoner could rise to, riches and aristocratic titles. But it was a winner-takes-all sort of game. So the emperor named generals, and if they were successful in their campaigns, they could aspire to the title of a marquis, lands, riches. But if they failed, and a lot of the time they didn't fail through blame of their own. If they failed, they generally faced execution and the execution of all their family members. And the example here is very fitting. Wei Qing and Li Guang represent both sides of the coin. They were both very brave and very able generals, but Wei Qing had a lot of imperial patronage and luck. He was, in fact, twice the brother-in-law of the emperor, because his half-sister was one of the emperor's empresses, and he himself got married to one of the emperor's sisters. And he was successful. He ended up being a rich and prestigious marquis. Li Guang was a great fighter, but he was dodged by constant bad luck. Lots of the time he had to fight vastly superior armies of the barbarians. He was defeated but managed to survive, which was no mean feat when confronting an army way, way beyond your army size. But that didn't sit well with the emperor, who expected success and more enemy heads cut than national heads lost, no matter what the odds. And in the end, Li Guang, after having failed, got in with his troops lost in a desert, and having failed to make a rendezvous with the troops of Wei Qing for a campaign against the barbarians, well, he decided that it was better to kill himself rather than face the humiliation of a court-martial and the execution of his family. So wars always, a game of chance. No matter how worthy you are, success and failure can shower on your head regardless. Okay, so we continue with the next line and with the next couplet. Since he was dismissed, age has found him, bitter and disappointed as his hair turns white. So this is Tang China, and this is just an abstract poem that could apply. It's a scholarly exercise. In fact, the context in which it is made, not only because of the references, but it feels more like it's talking about the Han era than the Tang era. But anyway, there were no pension schemes or greatly honorable retirements for men at this time. The general has been cashiered. He is old. He is bitter. He's probably not poor or miserable, but he he is not enjoying his ripe old age. In his prime, he could hit a bird in flight. Now his elbow withered, he cannot draw a bow. So the horrors of aging and how they affect the physical body. So now a general who was a great archer can't even pull the bow tight. So we see the ravages of time in his skills and abilities. He lives like Zhao Ping, selling melons along the road, or like Tao Juangming, planting willows by his gate. So more quotations, more allusions, and the abundance of them in this poem is what makes it feel a little bit of a scholarly exercise. Like if Wang Wei is saying, how many literary and pedantic references can I stuff into the poem while still making it feel natural? In this case, not generals. So, because we're talking about a retired person, the references are to famous hermits or retired people. Zhao Ping, the first one, had been a marquis during the first of the imperial dynasties, the Qin. He had been the marquis of Dongting. And when the Han, which was the successor dynasty, came to power, he was offered to continue in his position, but he refused. He preferred to live the life of a commoner, and he became famous because of the high quality melons he produced in the outskirts of the imperial capital, which were called for the title of his marquisate Dongling melons. So a person, I seriously doubt any or most of the old generals or retired from the town would have to make a living selling melons, but it's just an example. Or like Tao Juangming, great poet, one of the greatest, if not the greatest poet of the period of disunion. And he was a notorious recluse, a person who, not precisely for religious reasons, but who didn't like life in office in the dangerous late Eastern Jin court. And he lived a life of a gentry scholar official that was in retirement, enjoying the pleasures of reading poetry, drinking wine, talking with the neighbors and with friends, reading books, and the agricultural works and days. And one of the self-titles that Tao Juangming made for himself in his retirement was Mr. Five Willows. He has a biography, slightly humorous biography, called Biography of Mr. Five Willows. So just like Tao Juangming, the old general is planting willows in his gate in front of his house. Along his quiet lane are only failing trees. From his window, a few cold, empty hills. So he doesn't live in the capital or in any transited zone. He lives in retirement, on only four failing trees and empty hills surrounding him. He swears he would be another Gengong who found water at Shule, not like Guangfu, his career ruined by drinking at Jingchuan. So yet another couple of erudite references. But anyway, they serve to say that the general, in spite of his decline, says, I could still be useful. Yeah, I could still be a successful commander, and I haven't become corrupted by old age or vices like wine drinking. So the exemplar, Gengong was an important general of the Eastern Han Dynasty. So after the Western Han Dynasty fell, there was a usurpation by Wang Mang, and then there was a period of civil wars in which China lost most of the western regions, which had been controlled by the empire in Central Asia. But around the time of Titus and Vespasian, around the years 70, 80, 90 of the Common Era, an attempt was made by General Ban Chao and others to recover those territories for China. One of the generals that was sent to those regions to fight was Gengong, and he had to fight against outstanding odds. He defeated and fought against massive barbarian armies that vastly outnumbered him. He suffered a very long siege in the city of Shule at the foot of the Tian Shan Mountains in Central Asia. And the anecdote that is being referred to here, finding water as opposed to imbibing wine. So finding water, the histories say that while he was besieged in the city of Shule by the Xiongnu, they cut off the river that supplied the water supply for the city. The people got so desperate that they were starting to suck the water they could take out of excrement that they pressed. But after praying to heaven, Gengong managed to find a spring in the middle of the city with which to feed water to his troops. And in the end, he managed to return from there with only 13 men, including himself. Guangfu was a general from the Western Han Dynasty, and he had been one of the main generals who quelled the rebellion of the Seven Princes during Emperor Jing's reign. But anyway, he is important here because he was a very outspoken man and who liked drinking a lot. And in a drinking party, he got the chancellor angry, and the chancellor then trumped up some charges to have him executed. Okay, last stanza. Armies are gathering beneath the mountains of Helan. Couriers with urgent orders ride day and night. So back to the present. And war is about to break out with barbarians. Helan is in the area of what is today called in Outer Mongolia. I think it's Outer Mongolia. The Mongolian part that belongs to China. And that was a starting point for many of the Han generals' campaigns against the Xiongnu. So a campaign is being prepared. In the heartland, all the young men are drafted. The emperor sends out armies in 5 directions. So 5 directions: north, south, east, west, the center. It's just used in the meaning of in all directions. The old general brushes his armor. It shines like snow. He raises his sword, the engraved stars flashing. So we have this slightly pathetic image. The emperor is sending troops for war, is calling everybody to go to war, and the old retired general, a bit of a quixotic gesture, dreams that he might be able to join the campaign. He cleans his armor so that he can put it on again, and he raises his sword, an old antique, beautiful weapon, probably bedecked with jewels, which are like engraved stars flashing. With a bow from Jan, he could kill their generals. He feels shame that the enemy has crossed our borders. Don't ridicule this old governor of Zhong. He has courage enough for one more battle. So the general thinks or imagines that he would be able, with a bow from Jan. Jan was the northeastern region, so maybe it was a place where very good bows were made. So he imagines with a bow he would be able to kill the enemy leaders. But, we remember that a few lines before this one we read that he wasn't even able to draw a bow. So it's evidently a fantasy. But what is not a fantasy is the genuine feeling of courage and that he has, his willingness to fight, and his shame at seeing the nation attacked. So the poet concludes, with a sad dictum. I know this is a pathetic and sad figure, but don't make fun of this brave general. He wishes to fight. It's not his fault that he has become old and crippled. This general, who's called the old governor of Junzhong. Junzhong was also that province in Outer Mongolia under the Han Dynasty from which the expeditions took place. So all in all, a genre piece about military campaigning, about a successful general, about martial glory and bravery, but also about the ravages of time and the sadness that comes with them.